Magic players are unhappy. Alright, so that's the norm, that's the status quo. If Magic players weren't unhappy, I think the equilibrium of the universe might be damaged. I guess the magnetic field of the Earth would be shifted. We'd probably like fall into the sun or something. That's if the sun was real and the Earth wasn't flat. But Commander Legends was unique in the way that it was getting people to furiously type onto Twitter or flap their gums to signify their dissatisfaction with the state of the game. There were some people still clambering from trying to have an offshoot like a libertarian Magic the Gathering for their Lord of the Flies fetish fantasies. Then there were people who thought Partner was going to ruin the game the second time round, even though they probably learnt the first time round. Turns out they did. And then there was, of course, people who believed that Jeweled Lotus was literally going to shit in their breakfast cereal and fuck your wife. For the record, I found none of these things very compelling towards the whole narrative of Magic is dying. I care very little about these things. However, one complaint that I have seen ongoing as a discussion point is the power level of white cards by comparison to other cards in the colour pie. I have been very vocal about this in the past. I did a video asking why white cards on the whole seem to suck, and I still believe and agree with the vast majority of what I was saying, although I guess I do now appreciate that white doesn't suck completely. Like as a solo colour in a 1v1 format, it can hold its own, which would suggest that it doesn't completely suck. I am 100% aligned with white within Magic. My favourite decks in certain formats like Modern and Legacy is mono white or white splashing other colour variants of Death and Taxes. So I do like white weenie, disruptive white weenie decks. I do understand they can be powerful. I personally enjoy a wide board state and game plans that look to disrupt your opponent's resources. So welcome to another episode of EDH 101, where I look to engage with the discourse and talk about some of the things around Commander. This is a follow-on from my previous video about the white cards' power levels, and the follow-on from the episode Dice to Remove when myself and Brian interviewed Ari at Wizards of the Coast, the White Mana Guru. I'm going to talk about what white can and can't do, I'm going to talk about what it can and can't do in Commander Legends, what cards it got, and most importantly, what cards it didn't get. This video is brought to you by Skillshare. They reached out in order to support me in helping new players or even enfranchised players learn more about their favourite hobbies. That's where the EDH 101s as a series was birthed. Skillshare is an online learning platform looking to help people to learn about and develop new skill sets or even brush up on existing knowledge. They provide an extensive selection of classes on all sorts of topics, from graphic design to video and audio editing. This week I've been using the platform to learn about colour balance, camera settings, and some of the theory around concepts like white balance and colour correction, because people were complaining about the colour balance in my Commander Legends Seal Pool video. Look, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to get better with my camera settings, I'm going to be picking up some new lenses. I'm trying to make my content better, just bear with me. You too can check out Skillshare via the link in the description below. The first 1,000 people to click that link get a free trial to Skillshare, and then after that it's less than $10 a month, which is but a fraction of your average secret lair, and probably with less Walking Dead Magic cards. So what exactly is the issue with white's power level? The argument is often that white just doesn't get to do the same things as other colours do. Often this is talked about in white's inability to hold its own in Commander as a monocolour and how it struggles to generate card advantage. This has always been an issue since the very beginning of Magic's existence during Alpha, where we saw white get the worst of the boon cycle, and things have got better, but they haven't got better in the same way that like green has become one of the better colours where it can do practically everything. Red was often for the longest time described to be in a similar place as white, in a sense that it was very aggressive and it had a very narrow thing that it did, but didn't have access to card advantage, for example. It needed access to other colours to be a support colour in order to do that. However, they eventually got some really big love in inheriting a new part of the colour pie, the temporary or impulsive draw. You've got Act on Impulse, Experiment of Frenzy, Light Up the Stage. All of these effects, they're playing to Red's thematic identity. They are allowed to temporarily draw cards into the exile zone where they can either cast them or lose them. They have to work in the moment on passion and instinct. It's a slam dunk of design and flavour. It now feels like something that has been around forever, when in reality it only came in around Origins with Abbots of Curl Keep. It's a relatively recent include into Red's identity that just feels like it's an incredible fit for what Red can do. White's issues have been discussed for as long as Red had them, but probably more so as Commander has become more and more the most popular format in Magic. I can remember jokes about how white is the worst colour in formats like Legacy even 6 years ago when I started playing Thalia decks. But white isn't always completely boned in what it gets. Some sets introduce a plethora of viable and powerful options for white, not only for Commander but for Eternal formats too. So Conspiracy 2 infamously brought mono white decks in Legacy 3 incredibly powerful new toys: Palace Jailer, Sanctum Prelate, Recruit of the Guard. Recruit especially transformed the way that mono white Death and Taxes was built and played in Legacy, so it's quite unfair to say that white decks and white as a colour doesn't get any powerful new toys for older formats. The problem being is that these cards, whilst good, they aren't that effective in Commander. The common joke is that white can't perform in Commander, and there's some very obvious reasons for why that joke, well, it's based in reality. All good jokes are, right? A lot of this problem comes from what mono white is allowed to do as a colour. It is not allowed to draw cards. It generates card advantage through the creation of tokens as opposed to actually drawing cards. Some people would argue that virtual card advantage is still card advantage. But when you need to dig for an answer, it doesn't matter how many 1/1 soldiers you throw onto the table, you're not going to find an answer. And interestingly, white has good answers. It has some of the best spot removal in the game. It either has things like Banishing Lights and Oblivion Rings to exile things temporarily with a get out of jail option for the opponent, or it has pinpoint permanent removal like Swords to Plowshare or Path to Exile, which give the opponent something back. It's removal with downside. Of course, they have the arguably the best mass removal in the game with Wrath of God and similar. Sometimes that often plays into their own strengths though. So if you're attempting to create advantage by making 1/1s and 3/3s on the board with your token generators and your blade splicers, then to have your best removal spells being like huge sweeping wrath effects is counterintuitive to your game plan. So that's the stuff that white is kind of known for now. It does have access to other things. There are other things that were part of its colour pie that we see less and less of as time goes on. The obvious one is mass land destruction, was what white was known for. Armageddons and Ravages of War, but this is something Wizards will often shy away from as it is not fun. Ari literally said in the episode of Dice to Remove, when I asked him about Armageddon, he said they shy away from cards that could make people permanently quit magic when they cast against them.
So we've talked about Alpha and how Alpha had some imbalances, and those things definitely show up in Commander especially. Do we think that perhaps some of the things that white used to do, some of its things like Balance and Armageddon, are just not where design space wants to be anymore, post New World Order or whatever design change we've had?
Yeah, so it's not really a New World Order thing. That's more just about complexity on commons. But modern design sensibilities, we look at a card like Armageddon, and I guess the way I'd put it for myself is like, how likely is it that after I cast this spell, my opponent, who is playing Magic for, maybe their 3rd or 4th time, quits the game forever?
Right.
And with Armageddon, I'd say that's very high compared to most other cards. It is actually very high.
But you didn't ask that question with Nexus of Fate? No.
And once I get where he's coming from, I also have to kind of shrug. Like, you're gonna lose to stuff. Powerful effects. Isn't Armageddon any worse than an Oko? Perhaps the Armageddon shows you that you've lost the game, where Oko feels like you can claw back when you can't. Oko was banned in multiple formats, so perhaps that feels a bit like a disingenuous comparison, I guess. But it's true, there are many cards that make you feel bad. Like, Walkers feel like an insurmountable advantage when your opponent plays one on upticks or downticks. Is Ugin a real feel-good for your opponent? I don't think so. So I don't really buy the idea that they have to remove cards or avoid cards that make people feel bad, because I don't think they do that very often anyway. White's other strengths come in some of the best sideboard cards in the entire game. They often have narrow but incredibly disruptive spells, like things like Rest in Peace and Stony Silence. Normally permanents like enchantments, white has often had access to these prison or borderland stack style effects. They also come on bodies, looking at Thalias and Hokokori Dust Drinkers. Again, something that Wizards isn't keen in the modern day to replicate or do again with their fire design strategy. We do see a little bit of it, Tithe Taker was in the Ravnica block and things like that, but again, it's easy to see that they have not printed as powerful effects like Thalia in quite some time. And lastly, it gets protection, Mother of Runes, and more recently Giver of Runes. These are places that white is pretty strong. They've obviously moved away from this as well. Once upon a time they were trying to get rid of protection in general because they said it wasn't intuitive, but they've kind of swung back around to that. We're seeing a bit more in core sets, but often on green creatures. So what did white get in Commander Legends? I'm going to start by looking at the mythics, because I feel like that's where you can see the themes of the colour extrapolated to their most splashy and fantastical. Or at least, in theory anyway. A Chrome is a big old beater that pumps all your creatures. It's an angel, it has a lot of keywords on it, so I like it, don't get me wrong, but it's nothing new or exciting. Although as a partner commander, she is quite the big old beater to accompany another, card advantage engine or another colour. Again, it feels like white is the supporting colour here as opposed to the main star. Honestly, this is nothing we haven't seen before. Lyra Dawnbringer was a big old powerful angel that pumps your team. Sure, I guess so, but it's nothing that helps you catch up to what blue, black, or green are going to be doing in a game of Commander. Next up we have Seraphic Greatsword, my least favourite mythic from the set. It's the sword that makes a 4/4 angel when and if you attack the person with the highest life total. This is a mythic. Fucking hell. Who cares? Honestly, who cares about this fucking card? Archon of Coronation is a 6-mana 5/5 flyer that makes you the monarch when it enters the battlefield, and then you can't lose to damage? Okay, it's unique and it's kind of cool for beating some combos, but again, it feels incredibly meh, honestly. I don't look at this card and get excited to play it. I don't think it's going to do anything beyond be a splashy rare that someone plays because they've opened it in a pack. Getting the monarch is cool and everything, but it's relatively easy to lose it. People can obviously attack you, but there's more and more cards that give you the monarch, and white was kind of the colour of the monarch with things like Palace Jail, or at least I believed it was. But now, like, the best removal at common in the set, which is a draft environment as well, that gives the monarch is in blue. So you could just play this and your opponent puts a common the next turn and takes the monarchy from you. Sad trombone noises and Fs in the chat for the Archon. It's kind of a bit meh. And then we have arguably, well I say arguably, it's almost certainly the splashiest mythic in the set, Triumphant Reckoning. A 9-mana eerie ultimatum, but legitimately worse in Commander. Now, whilst the ultimatum is obviously 3 different colours with no ability to sync colours mana into it, so it's harder to cast and it's only available to Abzan, it is literally better in every possible way if you can cast it. The biggest change from Eerie Ultimatum to this is that this can't get back lands and creatures, and whilst Reckoning can get back planeswalkers, artifacts and enchantments, cool I guess. I understand why it can't get back lands, but the fact that it can't get back creatures for some reason is absolutely wild to me. This is a 9-mana game-ending silly effect that feels like a bit of a wet fart compared to the 3-colour variants at rare in a core standard set. I get and I understand that 3-colour versions of spells should in theory be splashier, but I can't help but be annoyed that this is almost hints at White's older abilities. Like, White used to be able to reanimate creatures. It was part of its colour pie and its colour identity, but as time went on they took it away. It's kind of like this card at the last hurdle during design, they're like, nah, we can't give them that. Let's not give them the creatures and make sure they're aware that there was something that was taken away from them years ago and has never been given back. Honestly, on a 9-mana mythic, I think it's kind of frustrating to see. So far, I am very unenthused by what Commander Legends has to offer. So moving away from the mythics, there are some other cards that I think are genuinely quite good and I'm excited to play with. Akroma's Will is an insane Anthem/Warcry effect. It's not Anthem because it's not permanent, but it pulls double duty. In some ways, it is a flying crane technique, but on crack. And other times, it's just going to protect your entire army from literally anything. It makes them indestructible, and it makes them protect from any colour, so it stops pinpoint exile removal. It's ironic, I guess, to an extent. Is it irony that this doesn't beat a Cyclonic Rift? You know, Blue's de facto go-to best spell in Commander is still better than this, but I mean, I can't expect every card to beat Cyclonic Rift. Maybe just one now and again to beat Cyclonic Rift would be nice, but this is not that card. Next up, they're exploring space that is reminiscent of one of my favourite cards in all of Magic, which is Parallax Wave. I absolutely love this design space, with cards like Promise of Tomorrow and Lithio Oathsworn Sentinel being able to save your creatures in a purgatory style or safe space in which they can come back from, with Promise of Tomorrow being a way to reanimate creatures that is mechanically unique to what Black does, if a little fragile. I think that's really cool. If Black can raw dog and drag corpses out of a graveyard and onto the battlefield using their mana, it's interesting if White can do that but through some sort of elaborate means, or means that involves enchantment permanence, or way that it can be undone. It made me wonder if something like Animate Dead or future variants of that effect could be more White in their theming, which then plays into White being the strongest colour for enchantments, and it using warding and protection magic to extend life, as opposed to literally just like ripping a corpse out of the ground and making it a zombie. I actually love Promise of Tomorrow for that thematic and mechanical level of like reanimation. I think this is really cool. So we see some stretching of what white can do with the rares. We see a bunch of relatively boring mythics, if I'm honest. And we obviously see the obligatory 5-mana Wrath effect. I mean, it was mandated by the 10 Commandments, handed down by God himself. Thou shalt print a 5-mana Wrath variant in every supplemental set. I'm really glad they're keeping up with those rules. But more interestingly, and perhaps frustratingly, is the things that white didn't get. There are some cards that people are saying should have been white. And I'm not talking about heuristic studies, where they're looking at things that feel a little bit white and taxy, therefore we can move to a colour pie. It's things that could have been printed in white with like a minor word change. I did an entire video on Opposition Agent, but we also have Hull Breacher and this Turtle Shaman as well. White has kind of almost had a monopoly on hate bears in the past. Low cost creatures that have static effects, often parallel effects that transform the rules of the game, making them more restrictive, but often in a fair way. Things like Thalia, Spirit of the Labyrinth, Leon and Arbiter, and Ethos of One Canonist. These effects become especially powerful when you get to build your deck with that effect in mind, whilst your opponent is blindsided, disrupted, and forced to play within rules or on axes that they weren't expecting or hadn't planned for. But instead, we got a you can't search hate bear in black, we got a you can't draw cards and I get the mana on trinkets in blue, and finally, and perhaps the least offensive of the three, it's a turtle that taps down your opponent's things being in bug colours, because this card is black for some reason that no one really understands. And the thing is, none of these are actually outside of their respective portions of the colour pie. Blue and black have had access to search and card disruption for a while. Look at even recent examples like Ashiok and Narset from War of the Spark, and the turtle having its text on a blue-green card makes sense. It's just the inclusion of black over white that is the bit that feels really off base there. The problem that I and many have with this is not that these colours are getting those effects themselves, it's that white isn't seeing any love in that respect. It's almost like white is getting less things this set than it has before, no disruptive elements, and other colours are getting them instead. It's not that I want other colours not to share these abilities with white, but for them to have it over white does piss me off a little. And part of me here is talking as a legacy player, because these are 3-mana creatures. These are playable in legacy formats. And it's not just me looking for another toy to make my favourite deck more powerful, but it's just seeing more things that white used to do, almost, not exclusively, but it used to be the best at, being put on incredibly powerful. Hull Breacher is very good, and Opposition Agent is very good as well. Having those things put onto these permanents over white bears or white creatures is frustrating. And like I said earlier in the video, what white can do is kind of narrow. It has these set things. Some of them are being taken away, like mass land destruction, for example. And now we have the hate bear disruptive elements and to bleed over to other colours, while white got none of them in this set. It's just not where I want the colour to be. Gavin Verhey did address this disparity between colours and some of the concerns on Twitter, talking about how the theft element of what Opposition Agent does is black, and that's the setting of rules via a permanent or spell exists in both blue and black in various ways already, and I don't disagree with anything that he's saying. I think the pushback and the frustration and upset around these cards shoulda, woulda, coulda been white come from the idea that white's colour pie is still narrow and getting narrower and not being expanded upon, whilst other colours are getting the powerful rule-setting cards that, with tweaks, could have been white, whilst also getting extra toys and extra powerful stuff in other ways. So to summarise, I think Commander Legends could have been a step in the right direction. There's some interesting new design space there for white in the tucking creatures away into X. I say new, Parallax Wave is old, but going back to that to give them some space that other things haven't got, like a Sanctuary safe space sort of spell ability, that's cool. And I don't begrudge Opposition Agent or Hull Breacher existing if we had similar bears in white. If we had a cycle, for example. This isn't the first time that we've seen a cycle. I mean, it's not acknowledged as a cycle, but a cycle of cards where the white card doesn't exist because they couldn't come up with a good fit. I guess opponents can't gain life and you gain that life instead could have kind of sucked balls. And not in a good kind of sucking balls. Like, there's nothing wrong with sucking balls. I mean, like, sucking balls that smell. Like, balls that stink horribly. And you're doing it out of the kindness of your heart, but it's making you retch. And there's a little bit of a confusing message coming out of Wizards regarding this. The slides for the previews of Commander Legends sets even used powerful white cards as a bullet point or selling point, but then Gavin observes that they know the issues with white has been the front of their mind for the last 9 months, suggesting that things will improve slowly over time. I'm just a bit confused because the memes and talk around white being a lesser power level in Commander are 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3 year old at this point. This has been a thing that's been joked about for a long time. But Wizards works like a year or 2 or sometimes longer in advance, so we'll have to wait to see if, we see improvements over time, and there are some improvements in the set, so maybe we're seeing the tip of the proverbial iceberg at them. Icebergs crash ships, so I can't use the tip of the shaft. I don't know where I'm going with that. So in short, I kind of hate that the hate bears aren't in white this time round, and I kind of like a bit of the white design space, but all the mythics seem kind of shit. So what would I rate it out of 10? I'll give it 5.5 beards out of 7. Is that too nice? 4.5 beards out of 7. I hope you found this video helpful or informative or at least interesting. I hope the examples I have used have been, at least some of them being new to you, information you hadn't seen before. I'm not trying to shit on Gavin or Ari or anyone working at Wizards of the Coast. I'm just more discussing the stuff that I'm seeing, and I don't think it's a wholeheartedly bad thing that I'm seeing either. It's just, a bit of both, really. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. Don't forget to let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and subscribe as well so I can validate my own existence. If you're looking to make use of the Skillshare offer, there's a link in the description below. The first 1,000 people get the free preview, pre-trial. And until next time, I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.